What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting back into Super Sons, really the conclusion of Super Sons, which is actually really good. This brings back something called hypertime. And in truth, we've kind of seen hypertime sporadically throughout DC Rebirth. And in all honesty, I thought it was a concept that I would never have to talk about. I was hoping it was something I could just kind of avoid and just not really discuss, because hypertime is not the best idea. I mean, it works for the purpose it serves, and it would have worked better if everybody had used it. The problem is that they didn't. So what's hypertime? Okay, hypertime was DC's attempt to copy Marvel's handling of the multiverse. So with Marvel, let's say that you have like a singular line on a piece of paper. So this straight line represents the main Marvel universe. Now, this line has been destroyed and created multiple times. In fact, 8 times to be exact, because the multiverse has been created and destroyed, 8 different times. So we have this straight line, and this main line is just the main Marvel universe. This is the story where Bruce Banner became the Incredible Hulk. This is the story where the original Civil War event happened. So this is the main Marvel universe line. But let's say somewhere along this line, we put a dot, and we can call it 1984, and we can say Peter Parker becomes Venom. All right, so this is Secret Wars in 1984, and this is the story where Peter Parker discovers the Venom symbiote. But let's say within this dot, the following events happen. Secret Wars 1984 takes place. Peter Parker discovers the Venom symbiote. Peter Parker brings it back to Earth, and then Peter Parker goes to visit the Fantastic Four. And Reed Richards says that's actually a sentient symbiote that you're wearing. It's a sentient organism. It's not just a black suit, and it's trying to take you over. And so Peter Parker casts it off. All that takes place in that little dot. Now, let's create a branch off line. All right, so we have a line that branches off and goes forward, keeps going along the forward, in the same forward direction as that main line. Now, we can say in that line, Peter Parker does not get rid of the Venom symbiote. That is how Marvel handles their multiverse. It's branch universe theory. You have a main set of events that take place, and then but what if something else happened instead? And then it branches off into an alternate universe. Now, we never really find out what happens in the future of those alternate realities. We get a story about one moment in that alternate reality. Another one of those lines may be, what if the Punisher's family was not killed in the park shootout? That's what those little branch off lines are. They're just moments in time where things broke off from the main Marvel universe. Now, this is how DC handles the multiverse. So we're gonna have 3 lines. We're gonna have one line, under that we're gonna have another line, and under that we're gonna have another line. And the very top line is called Earth 1, and the very bottom, the second line is called Earth 2, and the very bottom line is called Earth 3. And that's it. That's how DC usually handles their multiverse. Earth 1 is all the stories that have Barry Allen, at least before Crisis on Infinite Earths, all the stories that have Barry Allen. And before Crisis on Infinite Earths, Earth 2 is all the stories that had Jay Garrick, basically all the DC comics from the 1940s. And Earth 3 is called the Crime Syndicate of America, where the Justice League were bad guys. Now let's say all 3 of those lines suddenly stop. We can draw a line right through them, all right? That line that goes through all 3 lines, that's Crisis on Infinite Earths. All those universes are gone. There is no more Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth S. None of that stuff exists anymore. Instead, coming out of those 3 lines, we have one line, and that line is called New Earth. That's everything after Crisis on Infinite Earths, running all the way up to 2006's Infinite Crisis. And that's it. It's just one line, one universe. Everything that happened in DC Comics between 1985 to 2005 all happened in that one line. Now, 2005's Infinite Crisis brings back those 3 lines, is basically what it is. But during the time when everything was operating on that one line, Grant Morrison and Mark Waid had this idea, and they said, well, we can't do alternate realities anymore because there are no more alternate realities. So instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna invent hypertime. And what we're gonna say is that instead of there being alternate universe that have always existed out there, we'll say alternate timelines. Basically, it's the same thing. It was bringing back alternate realities, but just calling them something else. And so what they said is, well, maybe the Flash goes back in time and does this. And instead of things happening the way they always did on that one line, then it branches off into another line and something else happens. And it was bringing in all these different alternate realities. Now, it would have worked. Basically, what you would have had is DC's version of Marvel's handling of alternate realities, and that would have been it. The problem is that no one used hypertime except for like Grant Morrison and Mark Waid. And so what you would have is in the Flash stories, you have events that would take place, there'd be alternate realities, and then you wouldn't have that anywhere else. And so it threw the reader off and it confused the heck out of him, because people were like, but I thought there was only ever one timeline. But you read the Flash comics and it's like, well, there's a ton of timelines. There's all these different alternate realities out here and all these crazy things. And people are just like, but that doesn't make any sense. What DC did, at least what they seem to be trying to do with regards to DC Rebirth and especially New 52 is they're trying to blend in hypertime with their handling of the multiverse. So what DC basically says is, yeah, there's these alternate realities out there, Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, like they presumably exist out there somewhere. We don't really know what's going on with them, and we don't know exactly how it all fits in because of what Manhattan's done, but we can say they all exist out there. But in addition to those universes that have always been there, if the Flash goes back in time and changes something, well then hypertime gets invoked and it's an alternate reality. And that's what this story is. This story is basically DC's version of Marvel's what if lines of stories. That's what you can imagine this to be. If this story, Super Sons of Tomorrow, was thrown into Marvel Comics, it would be, what if Superboy killed everybody? Like, I mean, that's basically what it would be. You know, what if Superboy killed 1 million people in the DC universe? That's what the story would be called. It's essentially a future where Superboy had killed 1 million people for whatever reason, which we'll talk about in this video. And then basically that future's version of the Justice League and Tim Drake, who is Batman, went back in time to try to stop it. That's basically what this is. So if that has melted your brain a little bit, feel free to kind of scroll back and watch it a couple more times. Hopefully it makes sense and it kind of sinks in, or give yourself a few minutes. I know that when I read things that are kind of confusing, I have to give myself maybe 10 or 15 minutes to kind of let it sink in, and then it'll make sense to me and that kind of a thing. But the fact remains, you know, getting caught up so far, we've pretty much run over it. I mean, Tim Drake is basically Batman from the future. He showed up and he's trying to stop some event that will lead to Jonathan Kent, the son of Superman, killing 1 million people. The result is that where Tim Drake had initially shown up and then basically ambushed the Titans and then tried to overpower Jonathan Kent, the result was that Jonathan Kent had basically charged up and let off this massive amount of solar energy. Now, the issue with this is that with Jonathan Kent essentially knocked unconscious, what happened is that Tim Drake used it as a means to argue, see, I was right. I told you guys he was dangerous. Now, this is one of those things where Tim Drake caused the problem that he was trying to avoid, or at least showed people what it was that Jonathan Kent could do by pushing and prodding him. But he actually has a point. If Tim Drake was able to push Jonathan Kent to the point where he would let off this solar flare of sorts, albeit with a small amount of damage, imagine what would happen if somebody that Jonathan Kent truly trusted pushed him to the extreme and forced him to just let off this massive amount of energy. Not only that, what if he flew into the sun and absorbed all this solar radiation, came back to Earth, and then exploded? Imagine the damage that he would do then. And so that's the concern that Tim Drake has. Jonathan Kent's going to destroy Metropolis in the future. He's going to kill millions of people, and it's a scenario that can be avoided. It's Tim Drake's attempt to change the past. Now, picking up with Jonathan Kent, of course, having been rescued by Damian Wayne, the interesting thing about this is that Damian Wayne looks at the solar flare of Superboy as something that can be used. Where on the surface, most people would say, well, it's exceedingly dangerous and it could result in the destruction of everything. In Damian Wayne's mind, it's this idea, if Jonathan can be taught how to control it, then it's a power he can use, so long as he doesn't abuse it or anything like that. But in Damian's mind, the reason why, Tim Drake's future came into existence was because Jonathan developed this new power and there was no one there to teach him how to use it. Now, again, the other half of this is, of course, the Teen Titans of tomorrow. And this brings back some characters that have been missing for quite some time. Cassie Sandsmark, Connor Kent, Bart Allen. Of course, we did an explanation video on Bart Allen, which you're welcome to check out if you want a wholesale understanding of his character. But the fact remains that they're basically the Teen Titans of tomorrow. They're the Teen Titans of the future. Bart Allen, of course, playing the role of the Flash, Cassie Sandsmark playing the role of Wonder Woman, and Connor Kent playing the role of Superman. Again, we don't really know what happened to their normal stand-in characters, but the result is that Tim Drake kind of comes from their future. And it's sort of interesting because it seems like there's a bit of not really distrust so much as a disagreement on what role they should take, where the Teen Titans seem to have just kind of been like, well, I mean, if we could stop it, that's cool. Tim Drake is like, well, then let's actually stop it. And he just jumps into the past and tries to find a way to take out Superboy Jonathan Kent. Now, it is kind of interesting because, of course, as we saw in the first video, Tim Drake had incapacitated both Batman and Superman, which removed them from the equation. And at that point, it was really just kind of left to the Teen Titans to try to pull it off. And where Tim Drake initially meets with the other Titans, absent Damian and Superboy, who are currently, on the road recuperating, Tim Drake actually makes a pretty compelling argument. Superboy doesn't know who I am, but if I was able to push him to the extreme to the point that he would lose his mind and he would basically destroy the entirety of Titan's Tower, then what does that say if someone like Damian Wayne betrays him? He trusts you guys, he believes in you guys, and he cares about you guys. If you betray his trust or you push him to the edge, the amount of energy, because it's directly intertwined with his emotional state, means that he would be even more heartbroken, which means it would be even more damage. And so again, it's actually pretty intriguing and it's a pretty legit argument. The other half of this is the nature of Raven, in the sense that Raven almost sort of goes along with this idea of Tim Drake, and she really kind of buys into it. her argument is, look, if what you say is that Jonathan Kent has a level of power that he hasn't really experienced before, he's got a new energy, this super bomb that he can't really control, and that a time will come when someone will push him to the edge, his emotions will get the better of him, and he'll wipe everything out of existence, then we have to control him, we have to contain him, if for no other reason than to keep him in stasis so we can teach him how to use his powers. You know, it's really one of those things where it's like we're capturing him, but we're doing it for his own benefit. And it's kind of intriguing because this creates a rift of sorts among the Teen Titans. The scenario on one side, you know, Aqualad and Starfire is, well, I mean, you know, let's not be so heavy-handed. You know, there's a lot that we don't know about all this. The other side of Raven is, but we have Tim Drake here and he's already given us the future, so we know what's gonna happen. And that's why it's so cool. That's one of the reasons why the writing of Teen Titans was so popular and remains so popular among fans. It's not a pretty white kids with problems comic book. It's a story where it's like, man, these are some serious issues that these kids are dealing with and a lot of philosophical themes and different things like that. Now, of course, the other half of this is that in the future, Connor Kent, Cassie Sandsmark, and Bart Allen, they're trying to locate Tim Drake within time. The problem with this is that, remember, when you're in the future and you're looking at the present day, you're basically looking at a flowing river. And so, you know, if you have like a pod or you have like an object sitting in that river, it's not still. It doesn't just stay there. It doesn't sit in one place. It flows along the river. And so what they're literally trying to do is cast a fishing line and try to grab that object out of the river. It's going to be hard to do. You can't just reach in and grab it because while it's there now, in an instant, it could be somewhere else. And it could be anywhere along the time stream. It's a needle in a haystack. So the cool thing about this is that Raven, you know, while the future Titans are trying to anchor on to Tim Drake, and while they do manage to get a hold of him, which basically says, look, we can now track his location, Raven basically uses a little bit of telepathic voodoo, offers a distraction of sorts, you know, has everybody fix Titan Tower, and then just disappears alongside Tim Drake and Beast Boy. And it's kind of cool because in their mind, you know, in the minds of all these different superheroes, everything's being fixed. In the mind of Starfire and Kid Flash and Aqualad, oh man, they're fixing Titan's Tower. We'll take care of that first, and then we'll go after Connor Kent. When in reality, none of that's happening. It's just as in shambles as it ever was. And so it's just, again, the telepathic powers, you know, the telepathic abilities that Raven has to kind of mess with the minds of people, which is kind of cool. But at this point, we switch over to really the last bit of the story, switching over to, you know, the Superman number 38. And again, this really picks up with the idea that the Teen Titans, to a degree, feel kind of betrayed by Raven, but using the powers of Aqualad are also able to locate where it is that Jonathan and Damian Wayne are located. Now, of course, once they find them, then it's like, okay, we have to figure out a way to contain this situation. Now, of course, the immediate reaction of both Damian and Jonathan is one to attack, and it's also kind of cool because where Damian Wayne did assemble his own Teen Titans, and where each member of the Titans do have their own history, either as heroes or just kind of living in isolation, but are well aware of their powers and what they're capable of, Damian Wayne's job as leader is to know their strengths and weaknesses. And so while he has no powers to speak of, he does have the mind of Bruce Wayne, which means he knows how to easily overcome each and every one of these Titans. Now, of course, this leads to a stalemate of sorts just because of the fact that Aqualad's like, look guys, enough. Like, this is ridiculous. We need to calm down. Everybody needs to chill and we need to talk this out. What this also leads to is the arrival of Connor Kent and Bart Allen and Cassie Sandsmark. Now, it's not immediate. Instead, it's actually Superboy saying, okay, look, if everybody's really on the hunt for us, you know, Jonathan Kent's like, if everybody's really looking for us, then we have to go to the Fortress of Solitude. It's the safest place for us to go. It's virtually impenetrable except by those who know explicitly how it works, which is to say those who can speak Kryptonian or understand the Kryptonian language, which of course Tim Drake does, which is how he was able to penetrate it because he was taught by Connor Kent in the future. But it is cool because when they get there, the place is in shambles because remember, at the beginning of the story, Tim Drake showed up, he used his knowledge of the Kryptonian language to infiltrate the Fortress of Solitude and then subdue Superman. Now, the other half of this is Jonathan. Now, this is kind of cool because what Tomasi's doing is it almost kind of seems like he's drawing on a bit of Dragon Ball. If I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's almost kind of what it reminded me of. I mean, I don't know if Peter J. Tomasi watches Dragon Ball or even knows what it is, but it is kind of one of those cool scenes. You know, back when Dragon Ball Z first launched, Gohan was first introduced. When his father was in a dangerous situation, Gohan's power would emerge through his emotional state and he would let off this massive amount of energy. His power level would skyrocket, you know, and it would get really, really cool. It was one of those funny things. His power was tied to his emotions. The angrier he got, the more reckless and the more powerful he got until he was able to control his fighting abilities and different things like that. But with Jonathan Kent, it's the same way because it's his dad. It's his anchor to the world he lives in. Rescuing his dad from this container also sets in motion the idea that Jonathan Kent has a supernova power that he can't necessarily control. And in this instance, because his emotional state shifts in the extreme, his powers just kind of start running awry to the point that he can't control them. And this energy starts building up. And this proves the argument of Tim Drake. Someone is going to push Jonathan Kent to the edge and his emotions are going to take over. Reason and logic will take a back seat. His power will start surging and start enveloping outwards. And when it does, a massive amount of energy is going to explode and that's going to be the end of everyone. And so it's cool because with the arrival of Bart Allen, with the arrival of Cassie Sandsmark, with the arrival of Connor Kent, we basically get them fighting alongside Superman and the modern day Teen Titans. And in truth, this is a Teen Titans dream. I mean, those people who were reading DC back in like the 1990s, they were just like, yes! Those folks who are reading Young Justice in the early 2000s, they're in the exact same boat. It's a return to familiarity for them, even if it's only momentary. For those existing fans, they finally get to see Connor Kent alongside Superman. They finally get to see Bart Allen return to the DC landscape. Cassie Sandsmark, the second Wonder Girl. They get to see all these things begin to sort of grow and progress and so on and so forth, and things begin to kind of shape up and take their rightful place. Now again, it's temporary. For those of you guys who are non-comic readers, fans see this as DC kind of opening the door and saying, hey guys, like, look what's behind the door over here. I mean, we're gonna close it back, but like, that's what's waiting on you in the future of DC Rebirth. And it makes people so excited because in this moment, with this conflict beginning to sort of wind down, what ends up taking place here is that you end up having Tim Drake who kind of jumps in and absorbs all this energy that's essentially being let off by Jonathan, kind of absorbs it into himself and then vanishes into the time stream. Now, of course, this leads directly into the aftermath, but one of the things that I want you guys to notice here is that where Tim Drake absorbs all this energy and he's just kind of shot into quote unquote hyper time or into the multiverse, we end up seeing all these different universal events that have ever taken place. This is very reminiscent of the Button. Remember, during the Button storyline, when Batman and the Flash were thrown into the multiverse, it was all these alternate realities. The scene from DC Universe Rebirth #1, the one shot that set all this in motion when Classic Wally West finally came back. The idea of Crisis on Infinite Earths is shown here. The original Anti-Monitor, 0 Hour, Crisis in Time, when Hal Jordan was parallaxed and went crazy, and killed all the Guardians. All these extremely important moments are shown here. All these things, basically every single event that's ever happened in DC Comics is represented in this multiverse. And what this means is that this version of Tim Drake can land anywhere. Tim Drake could land in the middle of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Tim Drake could land in the middle of Emerald Twilight, in the middle of 0 Hour, Crisis in Time. He could land in the middle of Infinite Crisis. This is DC reminding us where things stand. There's a reason why you don't see the original Superman from 1938 here. You don't see Action Comics #1 represented here. What DC seems to be saying is, okay, so here's how things progressed. Barry Allen went back in time and saved his mom's life, and that spawned Flashpoint. And Barry Allen's like, man, this Flashpoint universe sucks, so I gotta let my mom die in order to make sure everything goes back to normal. He goes back in time to let his mom die, and things were supposed to go back to normal. But like Dr. Manhattan intervened for some reason, and we don't know why, and changed everything. And so we got all the stories from 2011 going forward until DC Universe Rebirth #1. That seems to be what DC's saying here. I'm not gonna take that as an absolute certainty, and we won't really know until the whole Rebirth initiative ends, and then we're with the final DC universe in terms of like, hey, we're done changing everything, we're done retconning everything, we are finally done, we're off to the races now, here's how it's going to be going forward. We won't know until we get to that point, until presumably Doomsday Clock ends, is really what I think all that. So I think Doomsday Clock will be where we learn everything that Dr. Manhattan did. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explain, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.